Welcome to my tiny kitchen. I have one corner where I do all my baking, and this is pretty much it. Some years back, I had some severe digestive issues, and I suspected at that time that gluten was not my friend. Maybe change the camera here a little bit. So I just started avoiding it, and recently, within the past few months, I did a mail-in DNA test that actually affirmed that actually I do have a sensitivity to gluten. So I still avoid it. Gluten, if you don't know, is a protein in wheat, rye, and barley that can cause digestive issues. And it's kind of become a fad with a lot of people because they think it's something healthy to do. It's not always the healthiest thing to do for everyone, but there's been a lot of research done, and sometimes they found that some of the herbicides and the pesticides that are used on wheat can be the cause more so than gluten. So it really depends on the person. But if someone really, really does have celiac disease, then gluten can be really disastrous for them. Gluten is a binder, think the word glue, in baked goods and that sort of thing. So because the flour or whatever you're using to make the baked goods does not contain gluten, you have to add something that is a binder. So that's one important thing that you have to remember when you're baking with gluten-free products. The more mainstream gluten-free products, like the flours and things that you can buy, are often made with highly refined products like white rice flour and tapioca, potato starch, arrowroot cornstarch, those sort of things. And those are all very refined. So they basically turn to sugar in your system once you consume them. So they're not really that healthy unless, you know, like I say, unless you really have celiac disease and you're really craving something. But I discovered some time ago, this cookbook, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's called the Gluten-Free Almond Flour Cookbook. And all the recipes in here are made with almond flour. Almond flour, it comes in two forms. There's almond meal and almond flour. Almond flour will be sort of a creamy color, and it'll look like that. It'll be sort of a cream color. Now there's another thing called almond meal. The almond meal is made from the whole almond, including the skin. And that's not very good for baked goods. It'll give you a whole different texture. It'll give you a much coarser texture for baked goods. Let me turn while I'm thinking about it, I need to turn my oven on. I'm sorry, we have a convection oven, so it's going to make noise. So anyway, I want to get my oven preheated. I need to preheat it to 350 degrees for this recipe. There are also other flours that are used in gluten-free baking. Bob's Red Mill makes one that's made from garbanzo beans and fava bean flour. And that has a high protein content, which is good. But there again, you have to add a binder, otherwise everything you make is just going to crumble. In this particular recipe, the binder that I'm using in this one is eggs, and the eggs will help hold it together. It'll make it rise, and it just gives it a nice flavor. You could also use egg substitute. That would be an option if you wanted to make it vegan, you could do that. One thing to remember is that almonds are not low calorie, but they are a high protein food. They're heart healthy, they're low glycemic. In other words, they won't raise your blood pressure or your blood sugar a lot, and they do contain. So, you know, the use of almond flour has its health benefits. Of course, you know, if we overindulge in any sweet things, it's not going to be as healthy for us. So these are really a treat for us. We don't have them very often. I also use almond flour when I make pancakes and waffles and things like that, and I use the binders. A lot of recipes and a lot of the prepared flours and things will contain some glue-like things in them. Often it's tapioca flour, potato starch, and arrowroot, but there are also some gum kind of things that they'll use. One of them is called xanthan gum. It's spelled with an X at the beginning. And that is actually derived from a fungus that grows on corn. So I try to avoid that. I had candida overgrowth in my body, so I have to avoid anything that's fungus related. So I try to avoid that. Another binder that you can purchase is guar gum, and this is used for thickening and for binding. This is actually made from beans. It's the ground up powder of guar beans. So this one's not as bad as the xanthan gum. And also that xanthan gum is used in a thickener in a lot of liquid products like almond milks and that sort of thing. And another one is carrageenan. That's also used as a thickener often, and that's a type of seaweed product, but that can also mess with digestion and help. It can cause reduced absorption of minerals and vitamins in your digestive system. So I try to avoid that too. And almond flour is not really inexpensive. You won't find any almond flour that's comparable in price, pound for pound, to regular wheat flour, because almond flours are, almonds are more expensive to grow and they're a more expensive product. I buy mine from a company online. It's called Natural Zing, and they're located in Mount Airy, Maryland. You can see the Natural Zing on here. And I just ordered online. I buy the big bag because I use it a lot, but you can also get this. And I like this one especially because it's organic. Almonds can tend to have a lot of pesticides on them, so I try to buy organic when I can. And another thing I wanted to discuss just briefly before we get started on mixing things here is sweeteners. And because of the same health issues I mentioned earlier, I avoid sugars. My taste buds personally have adapted so that sugar actually is unpleasant to me, so I don't even like it anymore. And refined sugar is, they've done a lot of research and they're finding a lot of connected health issues with refined sugar that, we think it's sort of an innocuous kind of thing because we're so used to it being in everything, but it does have its health issues. Now this recipe in this almond flour cookbook uses agave nectar, which is from the agave plant, which you'll probably be familiar with because tequila is derived also from the agave plant. It's somewhat refined, but this is raw and this one is organic, so I don't feel bad having a little bit of this once in a while. And sometimes I'll have the amount of this and I will add some applesauce as a sweetener as part of the sweetener in the recipe. It's not very often that I follow a recipe to the T. I usually modify it in some way. Steve can attest to that. Honey can also be used, but honey adds honey flavor to things, so it's going to have that honey taste in it. And so I try not to substitute honey if I don't want a strong flavor of honey in whatever I'm baking. Dairy, I just don't do dairy anymore, just for a number of reasons. In recipes that call for milk, I usually use almond milk. But as I mentioned before, I'm very careful of the additional ingredients that are in there, like the carrageenan and xanthan gum and that sort of thing. So I just try to be careful about the label reading part of buying food. Let let me check my notes here real quick and see if I missed anything. I think I've got it all. So today we're going to be making, they're called Very Vanilla Cupcakes, but I have a lot of options that you can change them from Very Vanilla Cupcakes to something a little different. And the first thing that we need to do in order to get started is to separate 2 eggs. And I have an egg separator here because I don't trust the shells to not crack the yolk. And I always have my eggs at room temperature, especially when I have to beat the egg whites, because they'll beat up more quickly and stiffer if they're at room temperature. So always have your eggs at room temperature when you're baking. Excuse me. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to beat these egg whites, and I just use my little hand mixer here, my hand blender with the whisk on it, because this does it faster than any mixer does. You want to mute that while I'm doing this? Sorry for the noise. They're getting to the point where they're almost stiff. They're not quite there yet. Okay. Now, when I pull this up, it makes a very hot. Makes a very high peak. Hit that by mistake. So those are nice and stiff. And the next thing I need to do is the same thing with the egg yolk.
Into a bird's eyes while
Huh?
look into a bird's eyes while the eggs being.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this is not for you, Ken.
Yeah, I already noted that. Thank you.
But you won't taste.
I said I already had noted that. Thanks.
Okay, so I have my egg yolks are now a nice lemony color, and they're beaten up. What I'm going to add next is I use either safflower or sunflower oil when I'm baking, because they have a mild flavor and they don't flavor your baked goods. And this recipe calls for 1/4 of a cup. So I'm going to add 1/4 of a cup. And I like this measuring cup because you can see down inside. You don't have to hold it up level to make sure that you're getting the right amount. And then it calls for a half a cup of agave nectar. I usually use less because I don't like them. I don't like the cupcakes to be too sweet. But today I'm going to use 1/4 of a cup of agave nectar. And I'm going to add 1/4 of a cup of applesauce for the sweetness and for the liquid. Now this is a half a cup, so I can put about a half of one of those in there. And you won't taste the applesauce once it's all mixed together. And then it calls for 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. And today I'll use the vanilla, but you can also substitute lemon extract. If you substitute lemon extract, you want to also add about a tablespoon of freshly squeezed lemon juice to it, and that'll make it even more lemony. And you could also use almond extract, and then they'll have a much more almondy flavor. You could add dark chocolate chips to the batter. You could add coconut. You could put half of the batter in your little muffin tin and put a dollop of jam or jelly in there, and then put more batter on top, and then you'll have a surprise when you bite into it. But today I'm going to go ahead and use the vanilla. Did anybody notice that vanilla has gotten more expensive lately?
Some vanillas aren't even available.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, it grows from a plant that's orchid-like, and I understand they're not, they're not easy to grow in captivity, so to speak. So we actually went to a botanical garden last year, and we saw a vanilla orchid growing. It was really pretty cool. Okay, so I have my egg whites, my stiff egg whites here, and I have all of my other ingredients in this larger bowl. This is the bowl that I'll be mixing the flours and everything else in. So the recipe calls for 2½ cups of almond flour. There's 1.
Now, Deb, with almond flour, I know with regular flour, you scoop it into the cup and level it off. Is that not an issue with almond flour?
Yeah, no, this is heavy enough that it doesn't get air in it like regular flour does.
Okay, thank you.
Besides that, it's really hard to pour out of this bag.
The almond flour doesn't add any taste to what you're putting it in.
The ideal thing about using the almond flour for these recipes is most of these, especially in this cookbook, are adapted so that the almond is enhanced by whatever you're adding to it. It's not a real strong almond flour or an almond taste, not like what you would experience if you use like almond extract in something. Like, for example, angel food cake a lot of times will have almond extract in it, and the almond flour does not have that real strong taste to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, the thing we use almond flour for a lot is when I make the pizza crust, because we make the gluten-free one that uses either cauliflower or broccoli raw. And you mix that up in the food processor, and you do add egg to it and Parmesan cheese and all that kind of stuff. It's an absolutely wonderful crust. It doesn't taste almondy, Martha.
Uh-huh.
But it's really, you can't pick it up like you do a regular pizza slice. You have to use a knife and fork, but it's really tasty. Makes a great crust.
Yeah, now this is what it looks like after I've just sort of mixed the dry ingredients into the egg yolks. Now what I'll do is, forgot to put in the baking soda, can't forget that. It calls for ½ a teaspoon of baking soda. And I just usually put, just a little dash of salt in. I don't like it to taste too salty, so I just add a little bit.
Deb, would you say the amount of almond flour you used again, please?
2½ cups.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm going to gently fold in my egg whites. Nice thing about having one corner where you do all your baking is you can have all your tins and all your ingredients right within reach. So I like that part of it. You don't have to walk all over the kitchen to get everything. So I'm using a whisk and I'm just lightly folding this over. And it's going to be a thick batter. It's not going to be a real runny batter like you expect with regular flour and milk and things like that. So it's going to be a little bit harder to incorporate everything into the batter. So you can see that it's still kind of light looking because the egg whites are making it a little bit fluffy. This recipe only makes about 10 regular size cupcakes, but in the interest of time for today, I'm going to make some little mini cupcakes so that they'll get done before our time is up. Now I have already lined my little mini baking cup with paper liners, because these are not fun to get out of a baking cup that has not been lined with the paper. Another option that you could have with these cupcakes is you could sort of make them taste like snickerdoodles. You could add cinnamon to them and make them a little bit spicy tasting, and then it's just another option. Like I say, you could add chocolate chips, you could add coconut. Now some of these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of jelly in the middle so that when they bake, have that little extra flavor in there. So feel free to ask questions, comments. So these are very tiny, so I'm just going to use a regular spoon to. And I fill these cups about maybe 2/3 full, just sort of like you would a regular cupcake. Well, some of them I'm going to fill not as full, so I can put a little bit of jelly in there, a little bit of It's actually called fruit spread because it's not made with sugar, so it's, they can't technically call it jelly. And some of you will have tasted these at some of the wine tastings. I used to bring them to the wine tastings quite often. Jenny Neslodge appreciated it because she couldn't have dairy or wheat, I believe. So this is just a blueberry spread. It's one that our daughter gave us from somewhere in New Jersey that grows the blueberries that makes this fruit spread. And the batter doesn't have to completely cover the preserves. It'll sort of melt down and cover it as it bakes. Plus it'll look pretty if a little bit of it's sticking over the top. Now, are you able to see what I'm doing here? You're the cameraman. My cameraman's falling down on his job here.
Deb, this is Cindy.
Uh-huh.
I have they have all different sizes of ice cream scoops. And I have a teeny weeny one that would probably work really well for that.
Yeah, I've used, when I do the bigger cups, I use an ice cream scoop sometimes.
Uh-huh.
These little ones, I don't know, it just is easier for me to control if I use my finger as a guide.
Right. The one that I have is, I don't know, like a tablespoon or so. It's teeny. It's really tiny.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
got about 3 or 4 different sizes too, and it really does keeps your finger clean.
Yeah.
And it really works great. Because I use it a lot. Like when I was doing my hummus thing, I was explaining how when I fill my trays like that for freezing it with my saran over top, then I can use they're called dishers instead of ice cream scoops, but in a store. Anyway, but you just grab your little scoops of pesto and put them in the little cups. Speeds the job.
That's a good idea. I've heard of freezing things like pesto in ice cube trays too.
Well, I used to do that, and it's a real bitch to get them back out of the ice cube trays.
Oh, is that right?
Yes. So now what I do, once they're frozen, I take the whole sheet of cling-free, saran, whatever you want to call it, and then I can pop it up and just fold it over and throw it into a Ziploc bag.
That's a good idea.
Then when I need it, I just take off as many dollops of it as I want.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Guess you could use a pastry bag if you're doing mass production.
Oh, yes, that's true. Pastry bag would be lovely.
Yeah, but then you have to clean up the pastry bag.
Exactly, where the disher can go right in the dishwasher.
Yeah, Debbie Ellerman and I are well acquainted with cleaning up pastry bags from decorating cakes together. Okay, this is the one. Some of these have the preserves in them, so I'm going to stick these in the oven. Because I have a little bit of batter left over, but I don't want to disturb. If I put them in the bigger cups and then put them in the oven, I don't want to disturb them halfway through. So I'm going to just wait and do this after I'm off camera. So, but that,
Yeah, we have a regular oven. When you see a recipe that talks about convection, what's the conversion for going from one to the other? Do you know?
it's about 25 degrees different. The convection bakes about a third faster than a regular oven because it's moving the air all the way around and it's not just, you know, in one place.
Uh-huh.
So it bakes it about a third faster than a regular oven. I'm going to set my timer here for 10 minutes and we'll see, we'll check on them in 10 minutes. So in the meantime, I'm going to show you some other gluten-free cookbooks that I've managed to collect over time.
Oh, great.
This was the first one that I showed you, the almond flour gluten-free almond flour cookbook. And this is written by Ilana Amsterdam. And she gives really good explanations in the beginning, in the introduction, about all the ingredients and what to have on hand if you intend to bake with almond flour. The recipes in here have anything from breads and scones, pancakes. It even has savory recipes like coatings for chicken and chicken pot pie. You can make a crust for your chicken pot pie. It has chicken parmesan. It has strawberry shortcake. I've made the carrot cake out of here and it is delicious. There's a chocolate chip banana cake, my very vanilla cupcakes, which are my go-to. It also has a recipe in here for almond crackers. You can make crackers, you can make muffins. Anyway, this is, you can tell that it's well worn by how messed up the pages are. But I really like this. It even has recipes in the back. If you really have a sweet tooth, it has recipes in the back for different kinds of frostings that don't use refined sugar. So that's a good thing to have if you just want to have something very festive, like for a birthday or something like that, but you don't want to have the regular, you know, powdered sugar icing on things. So this is my favorite baking cookbook. And this one is called the Blackbird Bakery Gluten-Free Cookbook. Now this is all desserts. And yeah, it has, this one also has an explanation in the beginning about the ingredients and what they're used for. This one also mentions different flours that you can use. Millet flour, sorghum flour, the garbanzo bean flour that I mentioned earlier, has all sorts of, it explains all the gums and all the different other ingredients that you use when you're baking gluten-free. So this is a good one. It's called the Blackbird Bakery Gluten-Free Cookbook. When we went to New York one time with our daughter, she took us to this bakery called Baby Cakes. And they're gluten-free and vegan, so they don't use eggs in their recipes. And I know this would appeal to Wanda and Amy Rose because they are vegan. They make, yeah, I'm trying to think for a second. They make some really delicious desserts, and there's a recipe in here for Irish soda bread. I make Irish soda bread using almond flour as well. There's bread pudding. And another thing that I have to avoid because of the candida issue that I have occasionally is I have to avoid yeast. So I can't eat any yeast breads. So all my breads have to be made with traditional rising agents like baking powder and baking soda and eggs and things like that. So none of the recipes that I make will use yeast. But this has some really, really delicious recipes in it. They have two versions. There's baby cakes, and then there's baby cakes covers the classics. And this one is the little tagline on here says vegan, gluten-free, and mostly sugar-free recipes from New York's most talked about bakery. I don't know if they're still there, but this person who wrote this book, her name is Erin McKenna. She had celiac disease, so she had to totally avoid gluten. So that's, she started just finding recipes that, or coming up with recipes that suited her and her family. And it got, her recipes became so popular with her friends that she ended up opening a bakery. So this has brownie.
Deb?
Uh-huh.
What did they use, like in the cakes, in place of eggs? Because that's your rising element.
Yeah, that's what I use in this one. You can use egg substitute, but
Okay.
there are a couple things you can use. One is flaxseed meal. If you mix that with hot water,
Oh,
it acts like a glue. So you can use flaxseed meal. You can also use some of the gums that I mentioned. The guar gum is good. If you mix that into it, it kind of makes things stick together well. It just changes the texture from what you're used to with regular, rising agents. So
thank you.
if you want to avoid eggs, you can either use egg substitute or you can use flaxseed meal. And
Okay.
I don't know what the proportions are. I guess it depends
Never heard of that. Okay.
but you just add hot water to that and it makes it very glutinous. So,
Okay.
and then there's another cookbook that I have here that's called It's a Pleasure, Sweet Treats Without Gluten, Dairy, and Refined Sugar. So this one kind of fits my MO pretty well. And some of the recipes in some of these books call for ingredients that most people who don't have some of the dietetic issues that I have wouldn't have on hand. And a lot of those can be ordered online. I buy a lot of mine at Mom's, My Organic Market in Bowie, and I can buy them at Whole Foods. Some of the grocery stores around here, like Giant, excuse me, Giant has a, excuse me, I need a drink. Giant has a natural foods aisle, or a couple of natural foods aisle that has a lot of specialty ingredients that are called for in some of these recipes. And this one also, it says, has an introduction here that says about the ingredients. So if you're new to gluten-free baking, it's really good to read up on the ingredients because they're so different from what you normally would use in baking. It's a whole science that you have to relearn because we're used to having, the yeast and the eggs and things like that. And some of these are just much more specialty, have many more specialty ingredients in them.
Now, Deb, on your ingredients, so if you couldn't do then something like you did today with beating egg whites. Is there a substitute for that kind of thing as well?
I don't know that the flaxseed meal would give you that same lightness and texture.
Okay.
This particular cookbook does use a lot of eggs, and I'm not vegan. I guess I'm more vegetarian, so I eat eggs and I eat some fish. But I wanted to make one recipe, or the recipe today. I wanted it to have mostly familiar ingredients, so people wouldn't be too intimidated by saying, oh, well, you have to buy this and this and this and this, So I wanted to make sure that it included some familiar ingredients.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And we're down to about a minute, so I'm going to check on our little cupcakes.
Smell good.
Yeah, they do smell good. I'll get a toothpick out here.
Yeah, and how many of those are you leaving at the church tomorrow morning?
How many would you like?
Well, just a couple. I don't want to be, too.
Oh, well, we can arrange that. You want the ones with the blueberry filling? they're almost done. They're not quite done. So if anybody has any questions, now's your chance.
Deb, who's the author of the last book?
I'll have to spell it for you because I don't think I can pronounce it. It's
Okay.
Virpi, that's her first name.
Okay.
Mikkonen. And the book is called It's a Pleasure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sweet treats without gluten, dairy, and refined sugar. And I think we need just a couple more minutes on our cupcakes. So one quote in this book that I like, she says, "In my opinion, true indulgence means that after eating a dessert, you still feel good and fresh and have no guilt over what you've enjoyed." And I think that's true, because I think if we're enjoying something and then we feel guilty afterwards, it kind of negates the enjoyment. And these recipes in this one, like I say, they do use a little bit more specialty stuff. Instead of, also, as I thought about it, instead of the safflower oil or the sunflower oil, you can also use coconut oil. Now, if I were going to make these coconut flavored and maybe add some dried coconut to the batter, then I would probably use coconut oil in them instead of the other oil as well, because that would give it more of a coconutty flavor. So that's another variety that you can make. And coconut oil, the thing about that is it's solid up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit. After it reaches 70 degrees Fahrenheit, it becomes liquid. So if you're using coconut oil in a recipe, you want to make sure that you have it at room temperature and it's melted before you add it to the recipe.
What do most of them use as a sugar substitute?
Most of the ones that I have made recipes from use some sort of a liquid sweetener like the agave nectar. I also sometimes will reduce the amount of sweetener and add some stevia powder or some stevia drops. It comes in.
I've used stevia, but I haven't used the drops.
Yeah, it comes in a liquid. It's an extract, and this is really good if you want to just add a drop or two to a cup of tea or something. I can also add some drops to a recipe to give it a little extra sweetness. Now, if I were going to substitute the liquid sweetener completely with, say, applesauce, then I would add stevia to that to give it a little more sweetness, so that it tastes more like a dessert rather than like a muffin. All right, I think we're done. I can get them.
Your corner works very well.
What's that?
Your corner works very well.
Oh, good.
You've got everything there and we can see you and hear you.
Okay, so here,
beautiful.
Here are little vanilla cupcakes.
Lovely.
And you can see the ones that I put the jelly in. It just out the top a little bit, which makes them look real pretty.
They look beautiful.
Oh, that is so pretty.
And they rose. So these are the plain ones. Now, if I wanted to add some sort of a sugar-free frosting to those, I could. Like I say, there are some recipes in this cookbook in the back. Some of them, in fact, you could, after they cool, I usually let these cool in the pan about 5 minutes before I put them onto a cooling rack, because they're really a little more fragile than regular baked goods. So I would let them cool a little bit before I put them onto a cooling rack. Some of their frostings in here call for, this chocolate frosting, for example, calls for 1 cup of coarsely chopped dark chocolate, which would be like baking chocolate, and it says here to use 73% cacao, half a cup of oil, and 2 tablespoons of agave nectar and vanilla, and then you melt it and stir it all together, and then you can just drizzle it on your cupcakes. That would be for chocolate. They also have a coconut frosting. They have a recipe in here for whipped cream, specialty whipped cream, and so anyway, there are options. They don't have to be just plain, but I don't usually add any of those extras to them unless I'm taking them somewhere special and I want them to look really pretty. But you can make these with chocolate chips and all sorts of additions, and I'm open to answering any questions or.
I have another question, Deb.
Okay.
Where do you find the stevia drops?
The one, well, I get it at Whole Foods, but I think you can probably get this about anywhere now, like Giant maybe.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was going to ask the same thing. Yeah.
I refrigerate it after I open it. It does not require refrigeration, but I refrigerate it after I open it.
Okay.
This particular one just says it has organic stevia extract in a base of deionized water and organic alcohol. So it's sort of like, an extract, like a vanilla extract or something, in that it has some alcohol in it. But, and you have to be real careful with stevia because it's like 1,000 times sweeter than sugar. So you don't want to overdo it with stevia because it is an herb. So it's not something that's like something you would want to use with abandon. You just have to be careful with it because it is an herb and it does have herbal properties. And if you use too much of it, it can give you a headache. So just be real careful that you not use too much of it.
Your cupcakes look like they rose a lot.
They did. The eggs and the baking soda did a really good job. And it's been about 5 minutes now. So I'm gonna
They're
go.
lovely.
And I'll break one open so you can see what the ones with the blueberry is going to be a little warm, so you'll probably see steam coming out. Let me move this out of the way.
Up higher.
A little higher, yeah. Oh, nice.
So that's what it looks like inside, and they're really moist and chewy. They're not dry at all.
They look delicious.
Yeah, and I won't mind if it's already broken. So.
He's not picky at all.
Bad. This one's you'll never see this one.
Yeah, Steve's gonna be our test animal here. So,
Will you freeze those now and use them?
they freeze wonderfly. Yeah, in fact, there's a recipe in here for some cookies that I've made, and I've frozen those and, taken them out a couple months later, and they're fine. Yeah, they're great. But anyway, that's my adventure with cooking with almond flour. And I hope everybody enjoyed it. And if you would like me to email you the recipe for these, I'll be glad to do that.
Definitely.
Please do.
Yes, I would like it. Also, I think I could do that.
It's part of the reason I chose this recipe is because it used more familiar ingredients, and it's a real familiar way of putting things together, just we would when we're baking with regular flour. So that's why I chose this recipe, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you make them at home, I hope you enjoy eating them.
Thanks, Deb.
Yeah,
Thanks for coming today.